Welcome to On the Way Classroom with Tony Crisp. Each weekday, Monday through Friday, Dr. Crisp will teach the Bible from its historical, geographical, linguistic, and cultural context. Tune in daily to start your day right and to deepen your understanding of how to better walk the way and enjoy the journey. Now, here's your host, Dr. Tony Crisp.
Welcome to On the Way Classroom. Today we're going to finish up our topic of the deacons in Acts chapter 6. Again, we are talking about the church in its infant form. They are just beginning to get organized, and the church of Jesus is organized. Now, we're either going to have organization or chaos. The word for order in the Greek text is the word cosmos. So I often say to leadership across America, and especially in the Middle East, you're going to either have cosmos, which is order, or you're going to have chaos, which is confusion. And we know how the enemy of our souls, the devil himself and all of his demons, want to totally destroy and cause chaos in our own homes, but also in the church of Jesus. And those two entities will make a difference into whether a culture is going to be godly or ungodly. So we must go back to these organizational structures that God has set up with order in the earth and in any nation. And that is the primary unit, which is the family, and then the church of Jesus. And that's the way that God does it. And I pray that you have a strong and ever-growing, stronger family relationship, but also that you're a part of the local church, because it's not enough just to have a great family. You need to be a part of a great church. And a great church is not equal to a large church. The megachurch movement has, I believe, seen its heyday. Now, you can say whatever you want to, but in just the last 15 years, we have lost less than 15 years. We have lost a third of our mega churches. And the reason is many times the mega churches are there and they're designed for a great purpose, and how I thank God for them and their leadership. They've helped us all in so many ways. But the Church of Jesus in America and around the world, they are primarily small in number. And so many of the smaller churches, they don't stay small, they replicate themselves, and they start new works and begin new works. And this is the way that the gospel was spread from Jerusalem around the world, and that's the way that it's still spread today. And so in the organization of the early church, you had an office of leadership and an office of fellowship. Now, does that sound familiar? The same thing's true in the home. And it doesn't mean that the husband is superior to the wife, that she is less than him in any way. She is not inferior. That is, the wife is not inferior. The woman is not inferior to the man in any way. Because each gender has its own particular strengths and weaknesses. And these are in our DNA, but we can greatly enhance those or degrade them by our own choices and actions. And so that's why the home is the real place of the beginning of instruction and the most important place for instruction in godly living. But also there is the local assembly. And just like you have an office of leadership and fellowship, in the family, you have an office of leadership and fellowship in the local assembly. And in our present culture in the United States of America and in Western culture, we have a tendency to get those mixed up. And when you do, you get chaos. For instance, most evangelical churches that call themselves Baptist, they are more in line with the organizational structure of the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s rather than in line with the organizational structure of the Bible. You see, there is the office of the elder, and sometimes that's called an episkopos, an overseer. Sometimes it's called a shepherd. Most of the time, that is in regard to the function of the overseer and the elder, and that is feeding the flock of God, as in the book of 1 Peter chapter 5 in the first few verses, where Peter, who is an apostle, says, I am a presbyteros, I'm a fellow elder, and the word sum is with that. That means he is together with them. He is one with the elders. And we are given oversight. The word is episkopos. We are given all of that so that we can shepherd the flock of God. And so much is the connotation of shepherding and the definition of shepherding having to do with feeding of the flock of God and finding food for the flock, that the King James Version of the Bible translated feed the flock of God, not shepherd the flock, which is the proper translation, but it says in 1 Peter chapter 5, feed the flock of God. That is, you elders and overseers, you need to be feeding the flock of God. All of that, all of those three functions has to do with one office. They're not three offices, and they're used interchangeably, and we'll see that in the book of Acts. You can see it in that passage, 1 Peter chapter 5, where the terms are used interchangeably. There are three functions of one office. But then there is the office of a deacon. And the office of a deacon is delineated in 1 Timothy chapter 3. But here, the function is given to us of the early deacons. The early deacons were to do three things. And they're just here in the scripture. And I didn't just come up with three. It's just what the number is. God likes the number 3. You say, well, it's always 3 points or whatever. Talk to God about it, because these things are just in the scriptures. And so it says that the purpose of these early servants, and by the way, did you notice that all of their names are Greek? There's not one Hebrew among them. All of their names are Greek, all of those. And the reason was the disciples, the apostles said, choose you out from among yourselves. So it was the Greeks that were complaining because their widows were being neglected. It would have been foolish for the disciples, who were all Hebrews, to say, well, we're going to put some people over you. No, they wisely said, choose you out from among yourselves, these men, and we'll give you the qualifications. You bring them to us, and we'll give them the assignment. Now, that's just backwards to how it happens today, because in our, at least Baptist churches and many others, there is a board of deacons. Well, there's no such thing as a board of deacons in the Bible. That is an American Western construct. That is not biblical. The deacons serve to facilitate service. That's what they did. And so he said, there is a need here, and you bring them to us, and we will assign them over this need. What need? The need for serving the tables. Now, if 12 men couldn't do it, 7 certainly couldn't. So these men were to have oversight over that particular area. So what do we find the deacons doing? Not ruling, not making the decisions. They were doing 3 things. They were keeping harmony in the church. After all, this had caused dysfunction and disharmony within the body. And the purpose of these men was to keep harmony, to quell that through making sure that the widows, in particular, that who are widows? Those who are widows indeed. They don't have children. They don't have caregivers. And these were widows who had been brought in the church. They were being fed by the church, cared for by the church. And the apostles couldn't see to all of that and do what they were doing in leading the church and growing the church and teaching the church. And so what they did was they allowed these people that had problems with their widows being neglected, bring us 7 that you choose out, and we will assign them for taking care of those who have no one to take care of themselves. That's the principle here. That was the number one responsibility, is to keep harmony in the church by caring for those who had no one else to care for them. And the only other thing we see the early deacons doing, the diakonoi, that's plural, these 7 men, and then those that were to follow, of course, would have patterned after them. was out teaching and preaching the Word of God out among the people. That is, they were with the people. Now, it's interesting that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, that there are not only qualifications for the deacon, like there would be for the overseers, the elders, the shepherds, but also for their wives. Why? Because these were men that were deacons, not women. You say, hey, now, what about Phoebe? Now, Phoebe was called a deacon, so was Paul, but he didn't hold the official office of a deacon. You see, the word deacon can be used in a positional, official sense, or in a functional, practical sense. Do I believe that Phoebe was a deacon? Yes, in the practical, functional sense. In other words, she was a leader and a server of the women of the church. That is the order in God's economy. And so these deacons, many of them no doubt had wives. If that was the case, Paul gave Timothy instruction that the wives were not to be she-devils. Now that's the word in Greek, she-devils. And they're not to be slanderers, they're not to be gossips, they're not to be talking when they should be listening. Now that's true of men, but it's especially true of women, and I didn't say that. God did in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Read it for yourself. I'm not making this up. And the reason is these men would be out there dealing with who? With widows, with women. A man doesn't need to be out ministering to a woman alone. And the person that would be most likely to go is not another woman that's not his wife, but his wife. The apostles had wives. The deacons had wives. Now, there might have been exceptions to that. The apostle Paul was certainly one. He was an apostle. But he said of the other apostles, he talked to the Corinthians and said, do I not have the ability? This is what Paul said to the early churches. Do I not have the ability to lead about a wife as do the rest of the apostles? They had wives, the apostles did. Peter had a mother-in-law. You can't have a mother-in-law without a wife. And all I'm telling you is this was assumed. Remember, every Bible writer from Moses to John assumed that the people to whom they were writing understood and believed the language, the historical, cultural, geopolitical customs of the day. It was assumed that everyone knew that the apostles had wives, that they were married men. Paul had a special gift of celibacy, and he speaks about that to the Corinthians. All I'm telling you is, a deacon, if he was going to minister to widows and to young women or anyone else that's a woman, he needed his wife to do that. And so it's a good model for anyone to follow, and this is what they were doing. And so they were taking care of widows, so they were serving the widows, taking care of those who could not take care of themselves. By doing that, they kept harmony in the church because they were out there where the people were. They were out there where the shoe leather meets the road, where the water hits the wheel. All of these analogies, use any one you wish, but they were where the people were. Sometimes a pastor or someone in the office of an elder can get somewhat separated. And let me just say a word to pastors here in ending. It's easier for me to talk with a member of Congress or a senator or even a presidential cabinet member than it is for me to get a call back from you. Listen, you're not God. Quit separating yourself from the people. If you don't love people, get out of the ministry or get right with God. Because you see, this is critical. We are called as individuals to love God with the totality of our being, but we're also called to love people. If you don't love people, what are you doing in the ministry? People are our business. And so love is a big deal to God, and it's a big deal to your people. And if you are trying to be separated from the people, nobody can touch you, nobody can talk to you, you never meet with people unless you've got all of these secretaries and so forth around you, you need to get a life. You really do, because you're not that important. And if you think you are, then you've got a bigger problem than just not loving people. You see, all of us get full of ourselves from time to time, but when that happens in my life, I know it will in yours as well, God will wring that out of us. And so my prayer for you is that we will be accessible to the people when that's possible. We can't be accessible to people all the time, But listen, the deacons are out there where the shoe leather meets the road, so you need to be in good relationship with your deacons. We all need to do that. And so the Lord help us to do that. The deacons in the New Testament, there were those that were official, that is the office. There were those who had the function of that. I believe Phoebe, there's nowhere in the Bible where it talks about a woman deacon except this passage that can be taken more than one way. What do we always do? We always clear up an unclear passage with a clear one. So we go to where it deals with the office of a deacon or a pastor, and you only see men in those roles. And so I'm not anti-woman. I'm just telling you this is God's way of doing things, and I pray that this is a blessing to you. The deacons did 3 things. That's all they did. They kept harmony in the church and disorders from happening. They ministered to those who had no one else to care for them, the widows, the orphans, etc., and those who were overwhelmed, like these widows were. And the third thing they did was teach and preach the gospel, and we'll deal with Stephen in the next session of On the Way.
Thanks for listening to On the Way Classroom with Dr. Tony Crisp. Tune in each weekday for more information on how to read, study, and understand the Bible. If you have questions, please write to questions@tonycrisp.org. That's questions@tonycrisp.org. Questions@tonycrisp.org. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day on the way.